in the past couple of videos, I've been saving chamomile from my own garden. If I had known this years ago, I would have been growing chamomile for forever. I had fresh chamomile tea the past 2 days, and OMG. It smells so much more fragrant. Its benefits for healing my upset stomach has been so much more powerful. It makes the tea more green and less kind of off clear yellow color. So I am definitely going to continue to grow my own chamomile and harvest that as much as I can. I actually harvested a bit more today because it needs to, you know, I need it. I love it. It smells so amazing. But if you watched those other videos, you may have noticed that I didn't have a ring on my glass jar. I ordered some rings from Amazon. I'll put a link in the description below. It's a 12-pack of silicone rings, and it makes this jar close airtight now. It's not glass on glass, and oops, I didn't put that on straight. So it's silicone, so it's flexible and it's good for heat and all of that, but mostly I wanted it for the airtight seal, and I can now close this up. It's not glass on glass, and my chamomile will stay fresh. Just make sure that before you put anything in an airtight jar that you've got it really well and dried. You don't want moisture in there to cause mold. You want to be using these to get healthy, not to make yourself more sick. I replaced this seal on this jar as well, and I'm just going to put my, oh, that's not, oh yeah, that's mullein. I'm just going to put my mullein in this jar. These have been drying on the table for probably 5 or 6 days, and I will use mullein tea in the middle of the afternoon when I've taken my inhaler in the morning and I'm not really so far along that I need to have a rescue inhaler. I just, you know, okay, I've been busy, I need to sit down and my breathing's, it's too humid, my breathing's getting a little off or whatever, or I'm talking too much. And I'm just, these are well dried. I'm going to tuck these in. And that's that. There's another one. In last week's video, I infused some mullein blossoms in olive oil on the stovetop, really low and slow. I just wanted to warm it through, and it sat for about an hour or two. I used some of this in my son's ear. He has a really thick earwax ball, and it didn't solve the problem, but it did soften the earwax. He still needs to see a doctor for it, but this was a good start to relieve some of the pressure he was feeling until he can get to a doctor. So in last week, I'm not sure if I shared it with you or not, I saved a bunch of plantain leaves. These are well dried now. I'm going to infuse some oil with plantain. I'm going to crush these up as I put them in. Expose more surfaces to the oil. Plantain oil can be used for skin conditions, or it can be mixed in with beeswax and oil and used to make different salves or ointments. I haven't researched enough to know if I can drink a plantain tea. Right now I'm after the plantain for the skin benefits. I don't know if you can see on the camera, I have rosacea, and I'm trying all kinds of things to try to ease that. Gut health is number one. But if I can put some kind of ointment on there to also ease it, that would be nice. Okay, I've just placed that in there loosely. It's not packed tight or anything. I want to be able to shake it and have it move around. If possible, get a cold pressed olive oil. You can also use coconut oil or almond, avocado, grapeseed. You want an oil that's going to work with your skin, and the molecules have to be small enough that they'll work. This is not even, doesn't even half fill the jar, so apparently I need more oil. This is the only time I will reuse a canning lid. This doesn't have to be protected by a pressure cooking or water bath canning or anything like that. It just needs to be airtight. So this is, what did I put in there? Plantain and olive oil. And this is August, what's the date today? August 14th, so this is Monday of 23. Let's make sure that there are no air bubbles trapped in there, There's definitely no moisture in there. These have been on the counter for a little while, on the tabletop, drying on this towel for a little while. So there we go. Let's get that. Oh, there might be more room now. I don't want to crowd it. I don't want to pack it down. Okay, so I've bumped out the air bubbles and I've labeled my lid. I'm going to seal that up. And I'm going to put that in on my pantry shelf where it's dark, and I'm going to shake that every couple of days for 6 weeks. I've also saved some yarrow flowers over the past week or so. I've saved stems with the leaves on them, and I've saved the tops. I'm going to use the tops to make a styptic powder, and I'm going to use the leaves infused in oil for ointment. As with any herbs, you need to do your own research and make sure you know what you're getting into. Make sure it's not crossing with any of your medications or allergies. Yarrow tea could possibly affect my health, so I'm not going to consume it as tea. But I can still put it on my skin. Okay, there's my jar of yarrow leaves. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the mullein. I'm going to put some olive oil in here, make sure that all of the leaves are covered, stir it, take the bubbles out, and then I'm going to seal it up with a label and the date. Always label it, because in 6 weeks you think you'll know what it is, but you've got if you have a jar of mint and a jar of plantain and a jar of basil, they're all going to look the same. So label it, and then you won't have any oopsies. You can infuse these in oil when they're more fresh than this. You want to make sure there's no water on them, so you might leave them overnight to dry. But these have been sitting for a little while, and I'm okay with them being dried for a week. They're dry. They're really dry. Make sure there's no air bubbles trapped in the bottom of that, and it's not packed too tight, and everything is under the oil. Seal it with an airtight lid. Label it. This one is yarrow leaf. Stick around for more and see what else I've done throughout the week. If you like what you're seeing in this challenge, be sure to hit the subscribe button and stick around for more. Every Bit Counts challenge is hosted by Jessica at Three Rivers Homestead. Be sure to drop over to her channel and catch the playlist she's creating of all of the other YouTube creators who are sharing their creations. Plantain oil, yarrow oil, mullein. I'm on my way to a winter apothecary. It's hard to believe it's August 15th already. We are halfway through the hashtag Every Bit Counts challenge. Today I'm going to be making apple butter. If I have time, I might throw on a second project. We have some cabbage left in the fridge that needs to be used up, and sauerkraut is a great way to extend its shelf life. Does anybody else hate taking out their food processor and cleaning it and putting it away again because there's just nowhere on the countertop for it to stay, and you don't need to look at it every day if you only use it once every couple of months? It's a challenge for me. I don't like dragging this thing out unless I have a good use for it. With my apple butter today, I'll wash them and take the stems off, and then I'm just going to throw them through the food processor because my recipe calls for putting it through a food mill, so you can use the seeds and the skin and the cores, and you'll get more pectin out of it that way, so it'll thicken nicely. But then afterwards I'm going to give it a quick wash down, and I'm going to do some sauerkraut. I have an appointment tomorrow that's going to take several hours out of our day, so if I can knock out 2 projects today, I might as well knock out 2 projects today. Some of these recipes call for 3 cups of white sugar, and one calls for 1.5 cups of brown sugar. I prefer the rich flavor of brown sugar, and it's a little less, so I'm going to go with 1.5 cups of brown sugar. So I have 2 teaspoons of cinnamon for almost 6 pounds of apples. I have half a teaspoon of each of nutmeg, cloves, and allspice. And they all call for 2 cups of liquid, whether it's cider or apple juice or water. So I had a little bit of apple juice in the fridge that I needed to use up. I mixed that in with water to bring it up to 2 cups. I'm going to put that on medium, and we'll let this simmer down. I'm just going to mash my apple pulp and everything through my sieve. I chose a large spoon so that it can actually, it fits nicely against the side of the strainer, the sifter, the sieve, whatever you want to call it. Okay, that's going to be a slow process. This is a heck of a lot of work. I think going forward I will just peel my apples and never mind this skin and core thing. Have any of you done it this way? If you have, please tell me what I'm doing wrong or how to make this easier. 3 hours later, and I'm still not done. If you have a chance to make apple butter and peel and slice your apples before you start, do it that way. This method of putting them through a sieve might have been faster initially to start with, but all the fuss and muss, it's taken me 3 hours to make 5 little jars of apple butter. And I don't even know if they're going to be apple butter or if it's just going to be really spicy applesauce. I've got them in the water bath canner now. They have to go for 10 minutes once it finally comes to a boil. It's almost a waste to bring that big pot of water to a boil for 5 little cans. I don't have another pan except the one I was cooking in. I don't have a tray for the bottom of this one. Yeah, I call this one a fail. I'll have a couple of bottles to put on my shelf, but what a waste of my time. And now, let's switch over to Dan, the Fern part of Buttercup and Fern, making sauerkraut.
Hey, I'm Fern, and I make sauerkraut, and it's delicious. I'll show you what I do. It's really, really simple. Basically 2 ingredients and a little bit of work. So why don't we get started? And I'll show you what I'm doing. Alright, so we're going to start with 1 medium-sized head of cabbage. Greener the better. This one's been with us in the fridge for a little bit, so it's not quite green, but the greener it is, the better the brine. It makes more brine. So basically we just shred it nice and small like this, as you can see. And the first process really is to get it to sweat. And in order to sweat, we're going to use some salt. Now, if you go online and look at all kinds of different recipes for sauerkraut, they will tell you to use all different measures of salt. But what's really important is that it's either pickling salt, kosher salt, or sea salt, and not standard table salt that's iodized. The iodized salt will inhibit the fermentation. And that's what we really want. And that sauerkraut is a fermented cabbage, pretty straightforward. The recipe I make is very simple. It's just salt and cabbage. I mentioned that before, but some people like to add all kinds of different things in here, including other vegetables sometimes, carrots and whatnot. It's up to you. Experiment, have fun with it. So we're going to start. I'm going to use basically, like, this looks huge. It is actually just 1 head of cabbage. I'm going to start with 1 tablespoon of pickling salt. That's what we have on hand. So basically I just sprinkle it over the cabbage, and then I start a process of mixing it all up. So what will happen is the salt will pull the liquid out of the cabbage and start creating a brine. So the first thing that I do is basically that, and I leave it. I'll leave it for probably about 10 to 15 minutes. After those 10-15 minutes are up, you can use a whole variety of utensils. This is what I use. And I basically go in and I start mashing, breaking it up and trying to push all the liquid out. And I do that about, I want to say I do that about 3 or 4 times. It does take a little bit of time because you have to let it sit for a while. But we go through that process until the cabbage looks, I don't want to say wilted, but it reduces. Once that's done, then we start the next process. So I can't do that for you right now. We'll do that shortly. It's been a little while. I've come in here and mashed it up more and more. As you can see, it's much lower than it was before, so it's really kind of compressed. And I want to see if I can show that for the camera, but we have brine in there now. So the next step, and I did have to add a little bit of salt to this. I felt that it needed a bit more, so I would say I probably add another half tablespoon. So next step is now to pack it into this jar, and we really do want to pack it down. Okay, so we're going to use canning funnel. I don't know if you can see that. We'll just use a spoon to get it into the jar. Try not to lose any of the brine. We've got about half of it in there now, and we'll use this stick
Pickle packer.
And basically we're just going to push this down as hard as we can. You can see the brine starting in here already. We'll just keep going. We'll fill it up. It'll all fit. Didn't look like it would fit when we started, but it definitely will fit. We'll have room for even more, I think. But we don't have more, so. Down to the last little bits. Any little bits of brine that are left will go in there. There we go. Now we'll continue packing this down. As you can see, still lots of room. This is a 2-liter jar, and that whole head of cabbage now fit in here. No problem. Now there's different options that you can do to keep everything down. We want to keep all the cabbage pieces down under the brine. So there's lots of different options. One of the things that I do is this is probably not the best tool to do it, but make sure that there's nothing left. Let me change tools. Just use a regular spoon, just push everything right down. I use a little trick that, I don't know, I guess I came up with it, but I'm not sure. I'm sure other people have used this, but it's difficult to keep everything down without all the little pieces of cabbage coming up. If you're using a wide mouth, then you would use a glass stone of sorts, but obviously with this it doesn't work very well. Some people will cut out a piece of cabbage, a round piece of cabbage, put it on there, and then put something on top. I use a trick. Let me get that. So I just use a medium-size freezer bag or Ziploc, and what I'll do is I'll fill it with water, and then put it in there, and it will, the weight from the water, and it'll take form of the actual jar and keep everything down. So let's get some water. So I put about less than half, maybe about 1/3 of a bag, and the trick is to get this in there without it spilling everywhere. Slowly slide it in. There we go. and then we'll seal it up. It's better to seal it up afterwards because it makes it more difficult to put in there. So as you can see, the bag has pushed everything down, and you won't see any of the cabbage come up. And it'll stay like that, but it'll also breathe. When it starts to bubble, it'll breathe. So that's all you really need to do. You probably want some kind of a light cover on this. So ideally you want this to breathe. So you know, you can't really put a hard lid on there. So one trick is to put a coffee filter and just a ring. And it doesn't have to be tight or anything, it just needs to stay in place. And then we'll leave that on the counter, not in the fridge. It needs to ferment, it needs to be at a certain temperature. Room temperature is generally pretty good. It will start bubbling. We'll leave it there usually for about 6 or 7 days, and then it's ready to go. It's ready to eat. At that point, you can remove everything, the coffee filter and the bag and all that, and then you can put it in the fridge and to preserve it, and just eat as you need. Eat it as you want. So some people would recommend leaving it in a dark place, but I've just put it on the counter. There we go. Fern's special sauerkraut.
Thanks, Fern. For today's part of the Every Bit Counts challenge, a friend of mine, Dorothy, gave me some oregano. I'm going to process that up. This is the second batch of oregano Dorothy has given me. I've taken the first batch and I've strung a bunch together and I've hung it up to dry. And I'll just crush that up and I'll put that in a spice bottle. I've been having some tummy trouble, and Dorothy suggested just take a sprig of oregano, put it in your teacup, and fill it with water. Oregano has a great reputation of being antimicrobial, antibacterial, antifungal, all of that. Perhaps the oregano tea can help my tummy. Lovely, it's turning green already. I'm just going to let that sit while I do this. It needs to cool off before I can drink it. Part of this bundle of oregano, I'm going to strip off of the plant, and I'm just going to freeze on a cookie sheet. Then I can put them right into a soup or a stew or a stir fry or a spaghetti sauce or wherever I think I might want fresh oregano. If I have more when I'm done the next process, I'll put the leftovers on here. Okay, I've stripped a bunch off the leaves and I'm just going to chop that all up now. I'm going to infuse this in olive oil. And my theory on chopping it up is the more surfaces that are exposed, the more is going to infuse into the oil. I want to infuse it into oil so I can use it for making salves later. And so I can also use the oil for cooking. It's going to be an olive oil, so it'll work just great for frying up some meatballs or doing some sun-dried tomatoes or something, and drizzling over top of big thick slices of zucchini, then putting it on the grill with other herbs and spices, of course. Nicely bruised and chopped. Okay, and I'm just going to fill the jar with olive oil. I'm going to use the handle of a wooden spoon just to make sure there are no air bubbles in there, and maybe mash it up a little bit more. This is a situation where I don't mind reusing a canning lid, and I will mark on it what it is. It's oregano and olive oil and today is August 16, 23. Now I'll go around and I'll shake that every now and again just to make sure that all the stuff is doing its thing. You may see me use this in a project in September or October. It has to go for 6 weeks or so. I'm going to strip the rest of this and put that on the cookie sheet, and that'll be that. Now I'm going to go enjoy my tea. Oh, nice. I think I need to sweeten it. Thanks, Dorothy. Hello, hello. Today I am making potatoes O'Brien. I got the recipe idea from my friend Lynn over at Bucket List Homestead. I'll leave a link in the description. Please go visit her channel. She's so fun. I'm going to use store-bought potatoes because my harvested potatoes are red skin and I want this to have a white skin. I like to leave the skins on. These will be frozen, not canned, so the skins will be fine. Come on down to the countertop and join me. For years we've been buying potatoes O'Brien and not knowing what it was called. You can buy them in some of the discount stores. There are potatoes and peppers and onions, and sometimes they have bits of bacon or sausage in it. I'm going to make these with potatoes and peppers and onions. Your potatoes have to be blanched and then frozen. Your peppers and onions can just go in straight from fresh cut. I've got them in nice even dices here so they'll cook quickly like a hash brown. I'm going to set this in water until I get a bunch of them. I'll leave a link in the description for my chopper. I love this thing. It makes everything consistently sized. It helps them to blanch evenly. It helps them to freeze evenly. It helps them to recook easily. Potatoes have to be blanched to go in the freezer because they'll turn gray or brown or unpleasant. It's the starch in them. There we go. Now I'm going to throw those in the freezer and I'll come back to them in a few hours. While my potatoes are in the freezer, I'm going to dice up some peppers and onions. I'm going to dice up extra onions because I have another project I'm going to do right after this. And again, I'm going to use my fantastic little chopper and get everything a consistent size with as little effort as possible. I'm going to use the same size dicer as I used for my potatoes. There is no perfect ratio for this. You put in as much or as little peppers as your family likes. Some people would not use peppers at all. Some people would not use onions at all. And I'm going to pop this in the fridge in a baggie or a bowl until I'm ready to assemble the whole recipe. I cut quite a bit off the end of my my onions, the root end, because if I cut too close to that, it makes me cry. If I cut further away from that, it doesn't make me cry. It's like the finer fibers send off more gases. Oh, this one's bad in the middle. I'm going to have to work on this one. All of these pieces I've cut off, even the skins, I'm putting in a bag of vegetable scraps. That's going to become my vegetable broth later. I put carrot tops and tails in there, and I put celery stems and leaves in there, and whatever I'm working with. I don't put potatoes in there because they turn gray when you freeze them, but this is just going, oh, I don't like the look of that one. This is just going in the freezer the way that it is. And then it goes into broth the way that it is. These were store-bought onions. My onions didn't turn out this year in the garden, and I want more than my garden was producing, so there's a lot. I bought two 10-pound bags for $5 a piece or something. It's not cheap, but this is food that we will eat for a long time. Okay, and now I'm chopping onions to make meatballs, so I want to have a different size. This was, oh, what do you call that? 1/2 inch? and I'm switching down to a 1/4 inch. Just like that. It comes with a little cleaning fork to get in there between the grooves. Much finer cut. We've been buying ground pork and ground beef and pork products and beef products from our neighbor. Some of these have been in the freezer a little too long, and the pork especially is starting to taste a little off, like freezer burned. It's not making us sick. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just starting to taste a little off. I'm going to mix ground beef and ground pork together. I'm going to add a bunch of seasonings, and because I have to eat gluten-free, I'm going to use some gluten-free oats and some ground flax meal as the binder with some eggs, and we'll make up some meatballs to go in our freezer. I like to crack my eggs into a bowl so I can make sure that there's nothing unpleasant in them. Now I'm going to wash my eggshells and use them for feeding back to my chickens. I almost forgot my onions. Let's start with that. If I need more, I can add more. I can't take them out, right? So here we go. Oh, it's still frozen. It's been in the fridge for 2 days defrosting, and some of it's still frozen. I love the scoop for making my meatballs. They're consistent size. I don't care if they're perfectly shaped. They're flat on one side, they're round on top. You know, I'm not serving the king. I'm just fixing my family some food. I'm using the spatula to make sure that it's packed in. There are a couple of ways I could preserve this. If it was fresh ground meat, I could freeze them and have them ready to go from frozen. But since it was already frozen and it's defrosted now, I have to cook it. It's just one of the food handling safety rules. You could put them in the oven and bake them. You could put them in a frying pan and fry them. I'm going to boil them. Okay, I've got a bunch ready to go. I'm going to turn my pot on and get that started. I could also, if I wanted to, I could form this into meatloaf, or I could form this into hamburger patties. I want meatballs this time. All right, this boiling the meatballs thing, I don't like it. The onions are all falling out of it, and the meat's starting to fall apart. I'm going to put them in the oven. I'm going to bake these in the oven at 400 degrees for 15 minutes. All right, those 2 trays, that's 70 meatballs so far, and I still have a bit to go. There we go. I've just put these in a couple of plastic baggies. I've got 90 meatballs in my freezer. If we use 10 meatballs at a time, that gives us 9 meals. When I went to pull the potatoes out of the freezer, I realized I didn't have to freeze them first. Why did I even do that? But it allowed me to do those meatballs. So now my potatoes, they're not, they're not stuck together or what have you. They're going to go in a big bowl. I'll put them on the cookie sheet and freeze them after, when I've got everything mixed in. I've got 2 batches of potatoes, so I'm going to put in, mix it in 2 separate bowls. So that's a decent amount of potatoes. Let's throw in some onions. Of course, like I said before, you can mix and match this as you like. If your family doesn't like onions, don't do onions. Your family doesn't like green peppers, don't do green peppers. If you have crumbled sausage, that would be, or crumbled bacon, that would be fantastic in here. I want more peppers. This has a lot of onions, but we like a lot of onions. You know what? I'm not going to put these on a cookie sheet. I'm just going to put these straight in the bag. I was originally thinking I'd put these in small serving size bags, which would be, for us, a cup or a cup and a half is plenty for any given morning. But if I put them in large bags, 1, it's going to use fewer bags, and 2, you can still take out just as much or as little as you want. So this is Potatoes O'Brien, and this is August of 23. This might last us till Christmas. The glory of this is you can throw this in a stew, throw it in with some gravy and some meat, and you've got yourself some stew fixings as well. Thank you, Lynn, for this idea. I never even considered doing this myself, even though we buy them. I like to freeze things flat so they're easier to take apart later. If we have guests, we use half a bag, or we can use a whole bag. I like it. I like it a lot. Again, I want to say thank you to Lynn over at Bucket List Homestead for sharing Potatoes O'Brien on her version of the Every Bit Counts challenge. And please be sure to go check out her channel, Bucket List Homestead. I'll leave a link in the description below, along with Jessica over at Three Rivers Homestead, because it was her who initiated the hashtag Every Bit Counts challenge. And here we go. I've got more meals to go in my freezer. This has inspired me to stock up. Hey, and look at that. I had some onions left over. They're going in the freezer too. This is the first year we've grown a successful batch of our own potatoes. I've already washed and peeled about 10 cups worth of potatoes, and I'm going to proceed to canning them from here. I'm using the recipe out of the Bernardin Complete Book of Home Preserving. It is exact copy of the Ball Book of Home Preserving. The cover's the same, the page by page it's exactly the same. Bernardin is Canadian, Ball is American. It's the only difference. It's the same company. Even the Golden Harvest and Bernardin, Ball, and Mason jars are all made by the same company. Everybody debates over the Golden Harvest jars. It's the same company. Save yourself $1 a case off, you know, or whatever by going with the Golden Harvest. So I'm working on page 392 today. We want to cut our potatoes into a consistent size. It doesn't matter if they're large or small as long as they're a consistent size. There we go. Now we just have to go through the canning process. I love it when I take stuff out of the canner and they're still bubbling. They're still bubbling. So that's it, everyone. That's the end of week 3. I got a lot accomplished this week, and every bit counts. Thanks for joining me for the Every Bit Counts challenge. Be sure to stop over and see Jessica at Three Rivers Homestead and my friend Lynn over at Bucket List Homestead. That's all for now, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to Buttercup and Fern Homestead. Thanks a lot. See you next time.